Welcome back to Communicology. This semester, I'm blessed to be able to teach a class in group communication and leadership, and I thought, it might be a good idea to talk about the basics of group communication. So today I'd like to give you a general overview of when we talk about group communication, what do we mean by that, and why we even bother studying group communication. Now, the down and dirty part of it is because, quite frankly, you're going to be involved in group communication pretty much all of your life. The only way to avoid it is to maybe move to a solo shack in the middle of Montana and never talk to anyone else ever again. Just live off the land, hang out with the raccoons and the bears, and live your life. But the reality is, very few people ever do that. You're going to have to talk with other people. And not just talk with them, you're going to have to live with them and work with them. And that's what we do. So whether you're talking about a friend group that you have, or your family, or people at work, whatever, you're going to be working in groups. I mean, even where you go and work somewhere, it's very rare that you're in isolation. You're going to be in some kind of a project group where you get together and do the things that you do. Now, before we start, let's also look at some terms to understand things. Now, sometimes people, when they talk about group communication, they also lump in team. So they talk about teamwork a lot, or being in a team. So teams versus groups, and people sometimes wrestle with that and wonder what the difference is. And quite frankly, some people do have them and use them interchangeably. And, for the most, instances you can, but let's take some time to look and see the difference. Now, whenever we talk about group communication, also we want to make sure we talk about whether we even move into that kind of that space, what we're talking about. Because again, if I'm talking to myself, that's, monologue. It's just single person communication. And when I speak face to face with another person, that's where we start talking about dialogue, or the idea of what we call interpersonal communication. So intrapersonal or interpersonal, myself and another person having a communication moment. So that's one thing that happens there. But as soon as you add that third person, now we're moving into what we call small group communication. And somewhere between 3 and 12 people, give or take, that's what we look at and call a small group. Then we start getting bigger than that. Then we start looking at, group communication, and then public communication, things like that. Mass communication, when we start broadcasting it and going further than that. But typically we're looking at the idea of 3 to 12 people. That's a group. Now, the other thing when we're looking at the difference between a group and a team, because again, you can have a team of 3 people, 12 people. You can have a team of more than that, because a professional football team has 53 people on the roster, plus people on the practice squad. Some college teams might have 150, 180 students on it. So that's a team. But, so teams certainly can be considerably bigger, sure. But the big thing is mostly just purpose and length of time that they're together. So for example, a group is typically assembled to do a common task and then disbanded, whereas a team is put together and kept together. So at work, you might have a quality assurance team, because quality assurance is something that you continually do. So it just continues and continues and continues. People might join the group, people might come and join the team and leave the team, but that quality assurance team sticks together. So when we look at a team, it's that permanence. Also, when you think of your favorite sports team, they might get new players or lose players, but it's the same team. It continues. It's not like your favorite sports team at the end of the season disbands. They just eliminate the team, and then at the next season they create a whole brand new team from nothing. It's the same team. The team, the core of it still stays the same. Again, some people can come and go. That's understandable, but that's a big thing. So again, it's that shared goal for a short period of time. So there's a problem at work, and we need to get a group of people together to investigate it. Or maybe there's an opportunity that we want to pursue. So we get a group of people together to investigate it. Or whatever the thing happens to be, when we get a group of people together and investigate it. And then when that situation's done, we disband. And then that's typically when we're talking about group work, what we're talking about in that situation. Now, again, it's one of those things that, you typically see and deal with. And typically when you think about in a semester of learning, you'll have like members of your class get together and they'll do a project and then they'll do a presentation at the end of the semester or whatever, and then they disband. They don't stay together the whole time. Now, earlier I did as an example use that you might be at work and you're going to be doing group work, or your family or your friend group as groups. But those kind of situations obviously be more team like, because typically your family doesn't join together and then just disband. It stays together. And same thing with friend groups. Ideally you stay together as well. So that's an instance where you might see team and group used and thought of interchangeably. But traditionally when we look at groups versus teams, coming together for a purpose, doing that thing, and then disbanding, group, versus coming together and having a shared task, shared goal, and it just keeps moving on, for whatever long period of time. That's typically more team-like. So that's a big thing to think of when we look at the difference. Now, one thing that's always interesting about why, we typically don't like getting together in groups is, for one, we don't like changing our routines. We as people have what's known as a preference for procedural order. Think about you. When you wake up, you have your routine. It works for you. It makes sense for you. So you get up and I do this, then I do this, then I do this, then I do this, and then I do this. Well, that works for you. But if you ever have someone coming over and hanging out at your house or visiting, and then next thing you know, you change that routine, and now you have to accommodate them. Let's say a relative comes and stays at your house, for a day or two or three. Well, now you're waking up and you've got your typical routine that you follow. Well, now you have to also make sure they're up, maybe get them breakfast, make their coffee for them, those kind of things. That throws you off your routine. Well, we as people have that preference for procedural order. We like things that make sense. We're logical beings. We like to have this nice orderly flow, and we don't like when things disrupt that flow. You get thrown into a group, instantly things disrupt the flow, because you know how you do things and you focus on doing things. This is how I do the thing. And now here comes another person saying, well, why don't you do it this way? Why don't you do it this way? Have you considered doing it this way? Obviously that could be helpful, but we like our order, so you can see where that could be a problem. So you end up having this disruption to your normal flow. Also, the organization might say, well, here's what we want. We want you to do X, Y, and Z, but you still have all your other tasks to do. Well, you can see how that disrupts your flow. So you're one of those things where I like my order. Leave me alone. Don't bother me. Just let me do my work. It's not that we hate other people. It's just that we hate being thrown into the mix with them and told that we have to do all these other things. Because students will gladly talk to each other in before class, after class, and even sometimes during class. But now you say, okay, well, now that you're talking, do a project together. That's a problem. Another problem that comes along too is, frankly, we don't like being in groups because people have absolutely different work styles than we do. And we end up seeing situations where we have different group roles. We see positive roles and negative roles. And so I want to take some time and talk about some positive group roles and some negative group roles and how that affects the way that we look at groups. So the first thing I want to look at is what's known as a harmonizer or a facilitator. Now, harmonizers, basically their job is to keep tensions low. They want things nice and simple. They like, the idea of people not fighting, people just enjoying each other's company. They're seeking harmony. They're seeking peace. No rocking of the boat. No name calling. No bickering. Now, that's a very positive thing to have, because obviously if you spend your time fighting, that doesn't do anything for you. It creates all kinds of problems. And this idea of having a harmonizer is a wonderful thing, because it does keep people happy. Keeps people content. And it's positive in almost every respect, except for sometimes on a negative. And we'll talk about this another day when we talk about conflict communication. Sometimes you need to have tension. Sometimes you need to have conflict, and you need to figure out how to work it out. Harmonizers, though, swoop in to try to make sure that it gets resolved as fast as possible, as painless as possible. So that's a positive role. Another positive one is what's called as a gatekeeper. Now, a gatekeeper makes sure that people are heard. So if you have someone who's talking too much, like, hey, thanks for your input. We haven't heard from this person. Or, hey, you've been quiet this whole time. What are your thoughts? So this person makes sure that everyone is getting a chance to be heard. Obviously, you can see that being very important, because if you have just one person talking all the time, or just three people talking all the time, and there's one person over in the corner who just doesn't add anything, you can see that being problematic, because they might have some great insight that you're missing. Now, they might not, but you don't know until you have them talk. So a gatekeeper makes sure that people are sharing, the communicative load, as it were, among each other, because all people deserve to be heard. And it's not saying that all the people's ideas are worthy of being heard, but every person is worthy of being heard. So it's important to make sure that that's being done. Now, of course, one downside with this person is if someone's on a roll and has really good important things to say, shutting them up prematurely to hear someone else might keep you from hearing some more good information. But overall, it's a good, positive role. The next one is quite simply called a record keeper. That's a very simple idea. Someone who keeps records, right? Well, if you think about a very short group lifespan doesn't have a lot of stuff, but sometimes if a group lifespan does, or they're doing a lot of intensive work, they're going to have a lot of material. Who is the one who's going to maintain all of those records? Who's the one who's paying attention? You think of like a secretary of a group who takes notes, or the minutes of each meeting. That's important stuff. It's like, well, what did we talk about last week when we met? The record keeper would say, oh, well, we talked about this, we talked about this, we talked about this. And, that stuff's super important. Maybe you're getting all this data. This person's keeping a hold of all that information. Maybe you've got some other kind of evidence, some kind of other media that you're keeping a hold of, and this person's, keeping it all straight. Again, super critical, very much important. The downside is it's the proverbial all your eggs in one basket. So this one person who's a record keeper doesn't free you up from not taking notes during a meeting. Like, oh, they'll take care of it. Well, what if that person gets sick or moves away or quits? All this stuff goes with that person. So it's good for you to be an important member of your own group, in addition. The other one, too, is what's known as a reporter. Now, a reporter, you're thinking journalism, but in this idea of group communication, it's the person who prepares all the materials for submission. Now, from a professor's standpoint, and also from a boss's standpoint, it is annoying whenever you have a group of like 5 people putting together a presentation, and then when you're watching the presentation, especially a slideshow is a great giveaway. But you watch a slideshow and it looks like it's 5 different people who just stuck their slides together. Like, you work on your slides, I'll work on mine, and we'll just stitch them together and call it a day. So it looks like 5 separate presentations. And when it's time to present, each person stands up, talks their 10 minutes, and sits down. And it feels like I'm watching 5 separate mini presentations instead of one thing from the group. A reporter gets everything prepared. So they take all of the written materials, make sure it's in the same tone, the same voice, and it sounds like it's from the entire group. You don't know who wrote which part. And they create the slideshow, and it's the same template through the entire thing, same font choices, same font sizes, all that stuff throughout the entire thing, and you can't tell who wrote which part. It looks like it came from the group. So that person is hugely important to make it look like a group, to make it sound like a group, to give it the feel of a group. So that's a reporter. And then the last one, of course, is the leader. It's the person who assumes the directive role, who basically spearheads and runs the group, that makes sure everything's going on task, that you're charging through to hit your deadline. Again, super important role. How they're picked, of course, is important. Leadership and how leadership starts is very important. But at the end of the day, this position's really important to make sure the project keeps moving along. Now, negative group roles are also very much a real issue that come into play too. The number one reason why we don't like doing group work, because we don't like dealing with the negative people. So there are a variety of different negative group work roles that come into play. The first one is what's known as the isolate, which if you think of like isolation, so someone who is an isolate, someone who isolates themselves. So basically someone who is present but doesn't participate. What they do is they show up, they take the oxygen out of the room and turn it to carbon dioxide, and they don't talk, they don't do anything. They're just quiet. They're like, I don't want to be here, I'm just going to sit here. Or they're super shy or whatever. Obviously you can see why this is a negative role. If I want to hear from each person, and the person doesn't want to contribute, that's a problem. If I need someone to do work and they don't want to contribute, that's a problem. So there's really no good thing that comes from being an isolate, but that's obviously a negative group role. Another one is the dominator. This is the person who talks far too much, far too often, for far too long. And it's just, the person just overrides everybody. And what it does, even if someone else is fairly talkative, they just choose to, that person's talking again. And they back out of the conversation. So if you know someone who's loud and obnoxious and everything like that, they're almost always this person in a group setting. It's like, you know what? Be quiet. It could also be someone who's a know-it-all, who has to feel like they have to get in every word, every last word. They have to have an opinion on everything we talk about instead of just being quiet. Just sit there and listen for once. Now, obviously, this is where we have that person, the gatekeeper, come in and say, shh, it's someone else's turn. But the dominator is a big problem. The next one is the free rider. And the free rider is the one, of course, that we really hate because they're the ones who just shows up. They don't do their fair share of the work. Now, the isolate is shy or whatever reason. They just kind of like hang out. This person just doesn't really care. I mean, they're expecting everyone to do the work for them. This is the bane of the professor's life, the bane of the supervisor's life, because it's only a matter of time before someone comes and says, make so-and-so do their fair share. Well, they're talking about someone being a free rider. And, it's annoying because, look, you're an adult, figure it out. Get on that person. I make my students who do group work fill out a contract and say, if you miss so many days, you'll be kicked out of the group. If you come unprepared, you'll get kicked out of the group, all that stuff. Because the free rider is the one thing that they almost all hate. And there's almost always one that's going to be in that group. So the next one after that is the detractor. So this is someone who always criticizes, always complains, always finds the negative. Hey, wouldn't it be great if we did this thing? That won't work. Or, hey, what about this other thing? Oh, that's a dumb idea. If you've been around that person, you can know how much of a drain they are on you. They're not fun to be around at all. It's one thing to be critical and to understand, like, I don't know that could happen. Let's think through it and talk about it. That's one thing. But just to be always negative all the time, the Eeyore of the group, you can see why that's a negative role. Then the next one is what's known as a digressor. A digressor is interesting because it's someone who, digresses. Now, if you have a focus for your group work and you're zeroed in, this is the project scope right here, this is what we're doing. A digressor could say, wouldn't it be cool if we did this other thing too? Well, yeah, that would be cool, but now it makes the scope that much bigger. Oh, we could also do this other thing, and now the scope's bigger. But there's this other thing over here too. Oh, then it's bigger. You can see why it's important when you're working on a group to have a good focus. Now, of course, a good leader will keep that focus happening. But a digressor wants to keep going off and doing some other kind of tangent thing. And it could be a really good idea, but just for the sake of our group, we just don't have time. We don't have the manpower, whatever. So that's a negative. And then close to this one, we have what's known as a socializer. The socializer also digresses, but instead of off to something that's related, it's off to something not related, like all the social aspects of the group and society in general. So you're about ready to start the meeting, or you're getting into it, and they're like, oh, by the way, did you see the game last night? Wow, what a close game. That was amazing. You're like, that's nice and all. Stop talking. Let's focus on our project. And then you'll start talking again. They'll say, oh, did you see who's dating? It's Tom and Sarah. That's amazing. I can't believe they got together. That's nice and all, but, let's stay focused. Did you see who won The Bachelorette? Stay focused. And then that person who wants to go off on all those tangents about the social stuff, it becomes a problem. Then the last one, of course, is the airhead, which is not really a very scientific or technical term, but you know what I mean when I say airhead. This is the person who's just constantly unprepared. Not the same as the free rider who doesn't care. The airhead's like, today we're putting together a slideshow. And, that was today? Oh, I forgot. I'm so sorry. Oh, you should have had this material. Oh, that was today? Oh, I forgot. I'm so sorry. You have that kind of thing. That's the airhead. And it's like, tune in, come back to earth. We need you here. We need you grounded and stay focused on your work. So here, you need to bring this next week. And, that was today? I'm so sorry. You have that problem. And that, of course, kills group momentum. So that was a quick overview of all these different group roles to give you an idea of group communication. Also looking at the idea of the difference between a group and a team. But the thing is, ultimately, what it comes down to it is we're going to be working in groups. Again, whether it is a family, whether it is a team you're in, or a club that you're in, or some school project or a work project, whatever. We're just in groups, and we interact with other people. And the danger is that you're one of the negative group roles. It could very well be. So be careful, and try to aim to be one of the positive ones. Understand your role. What do I do? How could I help this group succeed? Where do I fit in? Just where can I be plugged in? Because boy, it'd be great if you could have each one of those positive roles and plug in nice and neat, and the group just cruises after that. But that's the quick overview of group roles and groups in general. We can talk more about groups later as we continue, but that's what I have for you today. So thanks for tuning in. And as always, please share and like and subscribe. And if you didn't like what you heard, that's okay. Thanks for tuning in this long anyway. But we'll see you next time on Communicology.